Sandra stepped into the grand lobby of the Regency Imperial Hotel, a five-star paradise where only the elite walked. Dressed in a simple yet elegant black dress, she carried herself with quiet grace. The chandeliers above shimmered like falling stars, and the soft murmur of wealth filled the air, polished shoes clicking against marble, hushed conversations about yachts and investments. She approached the reception desk, her smile warm yet reserved. Before she could speak, the receptionist, a sharply dressed woman named Vanessa, barely glanced up from her screen. "Can I help you?" Vanessa asked, her tone indifferent, eyes flicking to Sandra's dress as if scanning a barcode. "Yes, I have a reservation under Bullock," Sandra said, placing her ID on the counter. Vanessa took one look at the name and let out a small, almost imperceptible chuckle. "Bullock, here," she tapped at the keyboard, her expression shifting from disinterest to amused disbelief. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have a reservation under that name," Vanessa said, her voice a shade too loud, drawing the attention of nearby guests. Sandra frowned. "That's impossible. My assistant booked it weeks ago." Vanessa sighed dramatically, as if dealing with a nuisance. "Look, maybe there's a mistake, but this hotel is extremely exclusive. If you'd like, I can recommend some places, more within your range." The words hit like a slap. A couple standing nearby whispered among themselves, eyes flicking toward Sandra. A businessman checking in gave her a brief, amused glance before returning to his phone. Sandra's fingers curled into her palm. She could feel the quiet judgment in the air. But before she could respond, a voice cut through the tension, calm, steady, yet carrying an edge sharp enough to silence the room. "Vanessa, is it?" The receptionist turned, her condescending smile freezing as she locked eyes with Keanu Reeves. He stood just a few feet away, hands in the pockets of his black coat, his usual easygoing expression replaced with something unreadable. The lobby fell into silence. Eyes widened. Even Vanessa, who had spent years perfecting the art of selective politeness, felt an unsettling shift in the air. Keanu took a slow step forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "Would you like to repeat what you just said to my friend?" Vanessa's throat went dry. She straightened her posture, suddenly aware that every pair of eyes in the lobby was now on her. There seems to be a mix-up with the reservation," she stammered, her previous arrogance crumbling. Keanu let out a quiet chuckle, but there was no humor in it. He turned to Sandra. "You okay?" His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of something dangerous beneath it, something that made Vanessa shift uncomfortably. Sandra exhaled slowly, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, just surprised, I guess." Keanu nodded and then, without looking at Vanessa, spoke in a tone that sent chills through the room. Surprise can be a powerful thing. The businessman who had smirked earlier was now watching, his phone forgotten in his hand. The couple who had whispered exchanged nervous glances. They all recognized that look in Keanu's eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disappointment. It was certainty, the kind that made people regret their choices before they even understood why. Vanessa scrambled to regain control. "Mr. Reeves, I assure you, this has nothing to do with..." Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times, then lifted it to his ear. The room was so quiet, even the sound of his breath could be heard. "Yeah, it's me," he said. A pause. His voice was casual, but the weight behind it was undeniable. "I'm at the Regency Imperial. You still own this place, right?" Vanessa's face turned the color of ash. The couple gasped audibly. The businessman took a step back, his gaze darting toward the exit. Keanu waited for the response, then smiled faintly. "Good. Then do me a favor, fire the receptionist." Vanessa's breath hitched. Her hands trembled as she tried to force a polite smile. Mr. Reeves, please, I didn't mean any disrespect. It was just a misunderstanding." She stammered, her voice suddenly lacking the confidence she had moments ago. Keanu let the silence stretch, watching her squirm. Then, in a slow, measured tone, he spoke. "You humiliated someone without even knowing who they were. You assumed, you judged, and you did it so effortlessly. I wonder how many others you've treated the same way." The weight of his words settled over the room. The businessman who had been smirking earlier now avoided eye contact. The couple who had whispered stood frozen, caught between shock and fascination. Vanessa shook her head rapidly. "No, I just..." Sandra, who had been quiet all this time, finally stepped forward. "Don't fire her." Keanu turned to her, surprised. Vanessa looked equally stunned, her wide eyes locking onto Sandra's. Sandra exhaled, her expression softer now. People like her don't learn if you just take away their job. She'll leave, get hired somewhere else, and do the same thing again. Keanu studied her for a moment, then nodded. Then what do you suggest? Sandra glanced at Vanessa, whose face was now a mixture of fear and hope. Then, she looked back at Keanu. Let her see what it feels like. Keanu raised an eyebrow. The entire lobby held its breath. And then, with a smirk, he slid his phone back into his pocket. Alright, let's play a little game. Vanessa swallowed hard. A game, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu turned to the hotel manager, a middle-aged man who had been silently watching from a distance, too afraid to intervene. You, Keanu said, pointing at him. Switch her position. Make her a hotel porter for the next 2 weeks. Gasps rippled through the lobby. Vanessa's mouth fell open. What? You can't be serious. Sandra folded her arms. Oh, we're very serious. You look down on people who don't fit your idea of wealthy. Let's see how you handle being treated the same way. The manager hesitated. Mr. Reeves, Keanu cut him off with a single glance. Unless you want to be switched with her, I suggest you make it happen. The manager nodded quickly. Of course, sir. Effective immediately. Vanessa's legs felt weak. She looked around, searching for sympathy, but the same guests who had admired her presence earlier now watched her like an exhibit, curious, entertained, but completely detached. This is humiliating, she whispered. Sandra tilted her head. Is it? She asked, her voice kind but firm. Now imagine feeling this every day, just because of your job title. Imagine being judged before you even open your mouth. Vanessa clenched her fists. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but deep down, a part of her knew, this was fair. Keanu glanced at Sandra and smirked. Let's check in, shall we? As they walked toward the elevator, Vanessa stood frozen, the reality of her new role sinking in. The couple who had whispered before, they walked right past her, without so much as a glance. For the first time in her life, she was invisible. The next morning, Vanessa stood near the entrance of the hotel, wearing a neatly pressed porter's uniform. The crisp white shirt and black vest felt suffocating compared to the designer blazer she had worn behind the reception desk. But the worst part wasn't the uniform, it was the way people looked right through her. A wealthy businessman strode past, handing her his suitcase without making eye contact. A woman in a fur coat dismissed her with a flick of her fingers when Vanessa attempted to offer assistance. This was what it felt like. To be judged, to be ignored, to be treated as lesser. She had barely started her shift when she saw them, Keanu and Sandra, walking through the lobby, chatting casually. They were dressed simply, effortlessly elegant, exuding a warmth that made them seem untouchable yet completely grounded at the same time. Vanessa swallowed hard, debating whether to say something. But before she could decide, another guest, a tall, arrogant-looking man in a tailored suit, snapped his fingers at her. You, get my bags, and don't scratch them, they cost more than your entire paycheck. Vanessa hesitated, anger bubbling inside her. Is this how I used to sound? Sandra, who had overheard the exchange, paused mid-step and turned. Excuse me, she said, her voice calm but firm. Would you like to repeat that? The man glanced at her, then did a double take. His expression shifted from annoyance to awkward recognition. Sandra Bullock, Keanu, who had been standing quietly beside Sandra, stepped forward. He didn't say a word, he just looked at the man. The businessman suddenly seemed a lot less sure of himself. He chuckled nervously. I was just joking. No harm meant. Vanessa gripped the suitcase handle, her knuckles turning white. The moment was painfully familiar, except this time, she was on the receiving end. Sandra smiled slightly. That's the thing about jokes, she said. They tend to be funnier when they're not at someone else's expense. The businessman muttered something under his breath and walked off, avoiding their gaze. Keanu turned to Vanessa. How's the new job treating you? Vanessa exhaled, realizing there was no mockery in his tone. No satisfaction in her struggle. Just a genuine question. It's different, she admitted. Keanu nodded. Good. Different usually means you're learning. Vanessa hesitated, then spoke the words that had been lingering on the tip of her tongue since the night before. I'm sorry, she said softly, looking at Sandra. I was awful to you. Sandra studied her for a moment, then smiled. You were, but the important part is, what are you going to do about it? Vanessa looked down at the suitcase in her hands, her grip tightening. The past 24 hours had been a brutal lesson, forcing her to experience the very thing she had inflicted on others. She could have walked away from it bitter, humiliated, but deep down, she knew Sandra was right. It wasn't about what had happened. It was about what she would do next. She took a breath and looked back up. "I want to be better," she said honestly. "I don't want to be the kind of person who makes others feel small. I don't know where to start." Sandra and Keanu exchanged a glance, then Keanu smirked. "You just did." Vanessa blinked. "What?" Sandra folded her arms. "You admitted you were wrong. That's more than most people ever do." For the first time, Vanessa felt something lift off her shoulders. She had spent years climbing the social ladder, believing power came from being above others. But standing here, in front of two of the most famous people in the world, she realized something. Real power wasn't in status, it was in humility. At that moment, the hotel manager rushed over, looking flustered. "Mr. Reeves, Ms. Bullock, I have new arrangements for you. A penthouse suite, full access to our best amenities, anything you desire." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "That's generous. Any particular reason for the sudden hospitality?" The manager forced a chuckle. "Well, you see, if we had known it was you checking in, there would have been no issue. It was just an unfortunate mistake by certain staff members." He threw a quick glare at Vanessa, as if she were still the problem. Keanu's expression darkened. Sandra, however, smiled. "Actually, we're fine where we are." The manager's smile faltered. But surely." Keanu cut him off. "What's unfortunate isn't the mistake. It's that you only care because we're famous." The manager opened his mouth but found no words. Sandra turned back to Vanessa. 2 weeks. That's the deal. But when it's over, you decide who you want to be." Vanessa nodded slowly, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, regret, hope. Keanu patted her shoulder as he and Sandra walked toward the exit. Just before leaving, he glanced back. "Oh, and Vanessa." She looked up. Keanu grinned. "You'd make a terrible receptionist, but I think you might have potential after all." And with that, they were gone. 2 weeks later, Vanessa stood in front of the Regency Imperial Hotel, staring at the grand entrance she had once walked through with confidence, no arrogance. Today was different. Today, she wasn't walking in as the woman who had dismissed people based on their appearance. She was walking in as someone who had felt what it was like to be invisible. As she stepped inside, the lobby seemed smaller. Not in size, but in power. The chandeliers still sparkled, the guests still whispered about stock markets and luxury vacations, but none of it overwhelmed her anymore. She walked straight to the reception desk, where a new receptionist, a young woman with nervous hands, was struggling to handle a difficult guest. "I asked for a corner suite, not a standard deluxe. Do you know how much I spend here?" The man snapped, waving his hand dismissively. The receptionist stammered, "Yes sir, I can check again." Vanessa didn't even hesitate. She stepped forward and gently placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "I'll take it from here." The receptionist exhaled in relief as Vanessa turned to face the angry guest. But this time, she wasn't using power to belittle. She was using understanding to diffuse. "Sir, I completely understand your frustration. Give me 1 minute, and I'll personally make sure you get exactly what you need." Her tone was firm, but calm, polite, but unwavering. The man blinked, taken aback by the unexpected professionalism. He mumbled something under his breath but backed down. Vanessa turned back to the young receptionist and gave her a reassuring nod. "Take a breath, you're doing fine." A voice from behind made her heart skip a beat. "Not bad." She turned. Keanu, Sandra, standing just a few feet away, watching with knowing smiles. Vanessa let out a breathless laugh. "You're early." Sandra smirked. "We had a feeling today was important for you." Keanu tilted his head. "So, tell us, who did you decide to be?" Vanessa didn't even have to think about it. "Someone I can be proud of." Keanu grinned. "Then I'd say the game's over." Sandra patted Vanessa's shoulder before walking toward the elevator with Keanu. As they disappeared from sight, Vanessa turned back to the lobby, her new world. This time, she wasn't just another person standing behind a desk. She was a person who understood. As Vanessa stood there, watching Keanu and Sandra disappear into the elevator, something inside her felt different, lighter. It wasn't just about them. It wasn't just about the last 2 weeks. It was about her. She turned back to the desk, where the young receptionist gave her a hesitant smile. "Thank you," the girl said softly. Vanessa smiled back. Anytime. She glanced around the lobby, seeing it with new eyes. The businessman barking orders at a bellhop. The elderly woman struggling to lift her luggage while a guest ignored her. The couple at the concierge desk, growing frustrated as an employee fumbled with their reservation. These were all things she had once overlooked, things she had once been a part of. Now, she couldn't ignore them. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. First, she helped the elderly woman with her bags, offering a kind word instead of a forced smile. Then, she gently intervened with the concierge, calming the frustrated couple before the situation escalated. Finally, she approached the bellhop, giving him a reassuring nod before turning to the businessman herself. "Sir," she said smoothly, standing tall, "I'd be happy to assist, but I ask that you show our staff the same respect you expect from us." The businessman narrowed his eyes, ready to push back, until he recognized her. Vanessa, the woman who used to be just like him. Something shifted in his gaze. He cleared his throat, nodded stiffly, and muttered, "Fine." Vanessa watched him walk away, feeling something she hadn't in a long time, control, but the right kind. She wasn't powerful because she looked down on others. She was powerful because she lifted them up. As she stood there, a realization settled deep in her bones. She had been given a chance to change. And she took it. Across the lobby, the elevator doors dinged open. Keanu and Sandra walked out, luggage in hand. Their stay was over. But before they left, Keanu turned one last time, locking eyes with Vanessa. He gave a small, knowing nod. A silent acknowledgement, a silent approval. Vanessa smiled back. No words were needed. They both knew, the real journey had just begun. As Keanu and Sandra stepped out of the hotel doors, Vanessa felt an unexpected pull in her chest, gratitude. Not just for what they had done, but for what they had allowed her to do, to see herself clearly for the first time. She exhaled, shaking off the lingering emotions. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The young receptionist, still standing nearby, hesitated before speaking. Were they really Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock? Vanessa let out a soft chuckle. Yeah, they really were. The girl's eyes widened. I can't believe you actually know them. Vanessa thought about that for a moment. Did she? Sure, she had met them, worked in the same space as them for 2 weeks, learned some hard lessons because of them. But truly knowing someone wasn't about proximity, it was about understanding. And if there was one thing she understood now, it was why Keanu and Sandra were different. They didn't just act kind for the cameras. They didn't just say the right things. They lived it. They stood up for people when no one else did. They made sure the forgotten weren't ignored. They used their power to change people, not by force, but by choice. And because of that, Vanessa chose to change too. She turned back to the receptionist, offering a small smile. "You know what's crazy?" she mused. "I think I just started knowing myself." The receptionist blinked, confused, but before she could ask, a guest approached with a question. Vanessa stepped back, letting the girl handle it. And when she saw the young woman hesitate, Vanessa gave her a reassuring nod. She had been given a chance. Now it was her turn to pass it on. Outside, Keanu and Sandra walked down the busy street, blending effortlessly into the crowd. Keanu slid his hands into his pockets. "Think she'll keep it up?" Sandra didn't hesitate. "Yeah," Keanu smirked. "Good." And with that, they disappeared into the city, leaving behind nothing but a lesson, a changed heart, and a story that would never be forgotten. The end.